He left me standing at the altar in front of everyone. The whispers in the pews were a physical force. That's when the cathedral doors crashed open. He wasn't my runaway groom. He was a stranger, flanked by armed men, and he walked straight to me. "Your fiancé stole $2 million from me," he said, "and you're the only collateral he left behind." My name is Emma Lawson, and in 1 hour I went from a jilted bride to the wife of a man I'd never met. This wasn't a romantic twist of fate. It was a calculated move in a dangerous game. What you're about to hear isn't just a story of a forced marriage. It's a documented tactic where people become living collateral for debts they didn't create. This is what happens when you catch the eye of a predator who doesn't take no for an answer, and the terrifying choice you have to make when your child's future is the bargaining chip. For 2 years before that day, my life was an equation I couldn't solve. A 5-year-old daughter with asthma, medical bills that stacked up like a second wall in our tiny apartment, 2 jobs, the morning shift at a diner where my feet ached and night classes at the community college, chasing a nursing degree that always felt 3 paychecks away. Sleep was a currency I couldn't afford. Greg wasn't just a boyfriend. He was the proposed solution. He was stable, or so he seemed. A project manager, he said. He charmed Lily, brought groceries when my card was declined, and promised a future where I wasn't drowning. The engagement felt less like romance and more like a life raft. I ignored the signs. The hushed phone calls he'd end when I entered the room. The way he never wanted to merge our finances, citing financial independence. The 2 suitcases he'd packed and stored in his closet a week before the wedding, which he told me were for our honeymoon. I wanted the fairy tale so badly, I accepted the flimsy set dressing. The morning of the wedding, a text came through. "I can't do this, Emma, taking on another man's responsibility." I only read the preview, the notification glowing on my locked screen. I told myself it was cold feet, that he'd be there. But in the cathedral, as the seconds ticked past the hour, the crushing weight of public failure settled in. 83 guests watched. My daughter in her flower girl dress fidgeted. That's when the doors thundered open. Not Greg, him. Alexander Volkov. He moved with a silent authority that drained the sound from the room. His men, sharp and watchful, took positions along the walls. He knew my name. He knew about the debt, $2 million. He laid out the transaction with chilling clarity. Greg had used our engagement as a distraction, a cover of normalcy, while he siphoned money and prepared to vanish. I was the abandoned liability. But to Alexander, I was now the only recoverable asset. He called it a proposition. Marry him and the debt disappears. My daughter gets security, the future I fought for. Refuse, and he would collect from Greg's family, his elderly parents, his sister. It was a choice between 2 forms of captivity. One was a gilded cage with a stranger who knew the brand of my daughter's asthma medication. The other was the moral ruin of knowing I'd condemned innocent people to pay for a crime I didn't commit. He had done his research. He mentioned the payday loans, the late rent, the exact balance of my dwindling savings account. This wasn't an impulse. It was a takeover. In that moment, I realized my entire relationship with Greg had likely been a scouting report, filed directly back to this man. I was not just collateral. I was a target who had been circled long before I ever knew I was in the crosshairs. I looked at Lily, so small and confused in the pew. I thought of the nights I'd gone to bed hungry so she could eat, the dreams I'd shelved. Alexander Volkov wasn't offering love. He was offering power, the power to never be powerless again. The priest was still there. The guests were shell-shocked. In a daze, I heard myself say yes. The ceremony was a blur of unfamiliar vows and a ring that fit perfectly. His kiss was brief, deliberate, a seal on a contract. An hour after being abandoned, I became Emma Volkov. As we drove away from the church in his armored car, Lily asleep against me, he finally answered the question burning in my throat. Why go through this elaborate public charade? Why not just threaten me in private? He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something beyond calculation. It was possession, because now everyone knows you're mine. There's no going back, and that's when the real terror began. Not of the man beside me, but of the world he was taking me into. and the unsettling realization that part of me was already calculating how to survive in it. The mansion wasn't a home, it was a fortress. My first morning, a woman named Nadia brought breakfast, knew my coffee order, and called me Mrs. Volkov with practiced ease. My old clothes hung limply in a closet next to designer items in my exact size. The surveillance was seamless, polite, and total. Alexander was at his desk by 7 a.m., managing his empire. I learned the first rule. His world was a series of concentric circles. Lily and I were in the innermost ring, protected, provided for, and constantly observed. The middle circle was staffed like Nadia and Dmitri, Lily's personal bodyguard, a quiet man with 3 daughters of his own who understood his assignment perfectly. The outer rings were where the real business happened. I could feel it, like a constant low hum beyond the manicured gardens. My autonomy existed on a spreadsheet Alexander had approved, a monthly allowance of $50,000, a $5 million trust for Lily, my transfer to a full-time nursing program at the university, all expenses covered. It was everything I'd ever struggled for, handed to me with one condition: acceptance. The control was in the generosity. How do you rebel against someone who gives you every material thing you ever needed? The guilt was a poison. Part of me was horrified at my own gratitude for the comfort, the safety, the sheer lack of worry about rent or Lily's next asthma inhaler. That gratitude felt like a betrayal of myself. A week in, I tested a boundary. I told Dmitri I wanted to take Lily to our old park, just us, no security. He gave a polite, unyielding nod. "I must accompany you, Mrs. Volkov. It is for safety." Not a request, a fact. At the park, he didn't hover. He sat on a bench, reading a newspaper, but his eyes never stopped moving. A man I recognized from my diner days approached, smiling, about to say hi. Dmitri was suddenly between us, a wall and a suit, his posture shifting subtly. The man paled and walked away. That's when I saw it, the invisible fence around us. We could go anywhere as long as we stayed inside it. Lily, oblivious, played on the swings. She had a new silver bracelet she never took off. "Alex gave it to me," she said. "It's got a star I can press if I get scared." It was a tracking device with a panic button. My 5-year-old was wearing a monitoring device presented as a gift. The confrontation happened that night. I marched into his study, the bracelet in my hand. "What is this?" "You're tracking my child." Alexander looked up from his papers, calm. "It's a precaution. In my world, there are threats. This ensures she is never lost." I threw it on his desk. "She's not a piece of inventory." He didn't get angry. He leaned back, his gaze analytical. "Do you know what Greg really stole from me, Emma? It wasn't just money. It was a digital ledger, names, account numbers, details of certain arrangements. He sold it to a rival group. Those people know he was connected to me, and they know through him about you. The tracker isn't about control. It's about beating them to her if they ever get an idea." The air left the room. This wasn't just about a debt. It was about a war I hadn't known I was enlisted in. My defiance crumbled into cold, primal fear. "Put the bracelet back on her," he said softly. "Please." I began to see the architecture of his power. It wasn't just fear, it was obligation. The cook, Mrs. Reynolds, her son's legal fees had been paid by Alexander. Dmitri's mortgage was held by a Volkov family bank with generous terms. Nadia's entire family was on the Volkov payroll. His loyalty network was built on solved problems. I was now the newest, most visible problem he had solved for himself. My surrender had bought peace for everyone around me. To rebel would topple their stability. The guilt multiplied. Then the first crack in his flawless facade appeared. It was late, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen for water and heard voices in the garden. Alexander and a man I didn't recognize speaking in low, urgent Russian. I caught one word repeated, "Miko." Alexander's voice was different, not cold command, but something strained, almost fearful. The next morning he was gone before dawn. Nadia was unusually tense. "Mr. Volkov is dealing with a family matter," she said. It was the first time I'd heard of any family beyond the ghost of his organization. When he returned 2 days later, there was a fresh, thin cut along his jaw and a darkness in his eyes that had nothing to do with business. He didn't speak of it, but that night he didn't retire to his study. He sat in the living room, staring at the fireplace, a glass of amber liquor untouched in his hand. I almost walked away. Instead, I asked, "Who is Mikko?" He didn't look at me, my older brother. He runs the family's operations in the old country. There was a long silence. "And he's not happy you married me," I stated. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "He believes I have made us vulnerable. That sentiment is a weakness, that you are a liability. He thinks I should have taken the money from Greg's family and left you in the cathedral." The admission was a seismic shift. Alexander had chosen me. He had defied his own family, his own brother, for a woman he claimed as collateral. The calculation I thought I understood shattered. This wasn't just a business transaction. This was an internal coup, and I was the prize or the poison, depending on which brother you asked. Days later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a single grainy photograph. It was me leaving my old apartment building months ago, holding Lily's hand. On the back, a handwritten note in Cyrillic. Nadia translated it, her face ashen. It read, "A beautiful bird in a borrowed cage. Does she know the door is locked?" It wasn't from Alexander, it was a message. My skin went cold. The threat wasn't abstract anymore. It had a name, Mikko. Alexander's reaction was volcanic. Security was doubled. He made a series of furious phone calls. That evening, he laid it out for me. "My brother tests me. He always has. You are the test. He believes I will fail to protect what is mine. He wants to prove my new life is a distraction that makes me weak." For the first time, Alexander and I had a common enemy. The power dynamic shifted again. I wasn't just a captive wife. I was a strategic asset in a sibling war. My safety was now a point of pride, a contest of strength. He looked at me and I saw the man from the cathedral again, all ruthless determination. "I will not fail, Emma, but you must understand the rules. No more unannounced trips. Your university schedule will be vetted. Lily's tutor will come here." The walls of the gilded cage weren't just to keep me in. They were to keep his brother's world out. I had traded one prison for another, but this one came with a protector who had his own demons to slay. The terrifying part was realizing I was starting to rely on him, to see his battles as my own. That's when I knew the real danger wasn't the locked door. It was the part of me that no longer wanted to leave. The silence after Mikkel's threat was worse than the threat itself. For weeks, nothing happened. No more packages, no strange calls. The security detail became part of the furniture. It was the calm of a coiled spring. I threw myself into my nursing studies, the one sphere where I had control. Anatomy and pharmacology were logical, their rules immutable. My world had no rules, only Alexander's will. I aced my midterms. Alexander had the results before I did. He presented me with a bottle of expensive wine in the garden, a quiet toast to my success. The pride in his eyes was genuine, and that unnerved me more than his anger. I was succeeding within the confines he'd built. I was becoming the perfect captive. Then the spring uncoiled. It was a Tuesday. Lily was at the kitchen table with her tutor. I was reviewing notes when Dimitri's voice, sharp and tense, crackled over the house intercom. "Lockdown protocol, now." The house plunged into a silent, efficient panic. Nadia appeared, her face a mask of calm, and guided me swiftly to a reinforced safe room hidden behind a panel in the library. Lily was already there, brought by Mrs. Reynolds. The door, thick steel, sealed with a hydraulic hiss. "What's happening?" I demanded. Nadia's composure slipped for a second. "Men at the perimeter gate, not ours." My blood turned to ice. "Mikko." We sat in the soundproofed silence for an hour. Lily, sensing my fear, curled into my side. Finally, the all-clear came. Alexander's voice was flat over the speaker. "It's handled." He didn't come to the safe room. He went to his study. I found him there later, cleaning a handgun with methodical precision. There was a spray of someone else's blood on his cuff. "For men," he said without looking up. They were probing, testing the response time. "They're in custody. I won't let them near you." The clinical way he said it, the blood on his sleeve, it should have repulsed me. Instead, a fierce, terrible gratitude surged in my chest. He had turned his violence outward as a shield. The part of me that was adapting, surviving, noted the efficiency. The part that was still Emma Lawson screamed. The next day, a lawyer arrived. not Mr. Harrington, a colder, sharper man. He presented new documents. They were insurance policies, wills, and custody orders. In the event of Alexander's death, a labyrinthine trust would provide for Lily and me, but with a board of trustees, his lawyers, his most trusted lieutenant controlling the funds. In the event of my death, full custody of Lily would pass to Alexander immediately, irrevocably. It was the legal architecture of our trap, finalized. Signing felt like cementing my own tomb, but I saw the subtext. Alexander was preparing for a war he might not win. He was trying to build a cage that would protect us even if he was gone. The gesture was so bleakly practical it stole my breath. A strange détente settled between us, forged in shared siege. We began to talk, really talk, in those late hours. Not about business or threats, but about books, history, the stupid comedy show Lily loved. He asked about my childhood. I asked about his. He spoke of his father, a brutal man who saw affection as a currency of weakness. He spoke of Mikko not as a rival, but as the shadow he'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun. I saw the boy who became this man. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained the hunger behind his eyes when he watched Lily and me. A hunger for a normalcy he'd only ever observed from the outside. 3 months to the day after our wedding, he made the offer. We were in the garden again. "You could leave," he said, his voice utterly calm. "Take Lily. I would provide for you financially. No security detail, no tracking, a clean exit." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the test. Mikkel's test, or his own. "Why would you do that?" He looked at me, and the mask of the Don was completely gone. "What you see as a cage, I intended as a sanctuary. But a sanctuary one cannot leave is a prison. If your happiness requires freedom from me, then you should have it." The power dynamic I had mapped so carefully inverted. He was handing me the key. The choice was finally, terrifyingly my own. I didn't sleep. I paced my beautiful room. I imagined a small apartment, a normal life. The fear of unpaid bills replaced by the fear of Mikkel's men, who would no longer be held back by Alexander's wrath. I imagined Lily asking for Papa Alex. I remembered the blood on his cuff, the steel door of the safe room, the tracker on her wrist that was, in this violent world, a lifeline. My freedom would make us vulnerable. His protection came with a price, but it was real. By dawn, I knew my answer. I didn't need time. I chose to stay. I crossed the threshold of the connecting door. He was waiting as if he hadn't moved all night. I choose to stay, not because I have to, because I want to. The words hung between us. Something fractured in his guarded expression. Relief, hope, a vulnerability so raw it was painful to witness. He didn't reach for me. He simply said, "Then we face it together." That night, the door between our rooms remained open. The change was seismic. I was no longer a captive asset. I was a consigliere. He began to explain the mechanics of his empire, the legitimate fronts, the gray areas, the dark corners he was trying to disentangle from. I saw the ledger Greg had stolen. It wasn't just numbers. It was a map of corruption, with city officials, police captains, and rival syndicates marked like chess pieces. I understood then the true scale of the danger, and I understood why Mikkel wanted it. With this, he could dismantle Alexander's operation here and claim the territory. We developed a routine, a fragile fighting partnership. I used my nursing logic to spot inconsistencies in financial reports. He used his network to quietly pressure the hospital to fast-track my clinical hours. We were building a life, piece by piece, under the shadow of a sword. Lily called him Papa now. The sound of it no longer filled me with dread, but with a complicated, aching warmth. Then the sword fell. It was Mikkel. It was Greg. A Interpol alert flashed on Alexander's secure monitor. Greg had been found, dead, in a Monaco hotel room, an apparent overdose. But the attached police report, leaked by a contact, noted a peculiar detail. On his phone, the last dialed number was mine, and his bank records showed a single, massive incoming transfer 2 days prior from a shell company linked to Mikkel. The pieces clicked with horrifying clarity. Mikkel hadn't just been testing us. He'd been using Greg as a pawn. He'd funded him, probably promised him protection, and then had him killed. And he'd made sure the trail led back to my doorstep. This wasn't just a power play anymore. It was a frame. Mikkel was giving his brother an ultimatum. Hand over the woman who's making you weak, or watch her go to prison for a murder you know I committed." Alexander's face went pale. He saw it instantly. The chessboard had been swept clean. This was checkmate. The police would come. The evidence was circumstantial but plausible. My past with Greg, his abandonment, a mysterious new wealthy husband with criminal ties. It was a prosecutor's fantasy. I looked at Alexander, at the fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. The walls of our sanctuary were crumbling, and this time the threat was wearing a badge. We had built a life in the eye of a hurricane, and now the storm was coming ashore, and it was bringing the law with it. The police arrived at 10 a.m. Two detectives, polite but with eyes that missed nothing. They asked to speak with me alone. Alexander's lawyer was present before they finished their first sentence. They asked about Greg, about our relationship, about the last time we spoke. I told the truth, the cathedral, the abandonment. They showed me a grainy still from a Monaco casino floor, Greg laughing with a blonde woman, dated 2 days before his death. They asked if I was angry. I said I was humiliated, then relieved, then terrified. All true. They mentioned the money transfer, the call log. They were building a profile, a scorned woman with a powerful, dangerous new husband, a perfect story. Alexander remained ice cold. He provided my alibi for the night of the murder, security footage from the estate, my university login timestamps for an online exam, an airtight digital cage. The detectives left, unsatisfied but with their narrative crumbling. The real war, however, was just beginning. This was Mikkel's true move, not to get me arrested, but to force Alexander's hand into the open, to make him use his resources to protect me, exposing his vulnerabilities. It was working. Alexander's focus split. The business suffered. Rumors of weakness spread. I couldn't just be protected anymore. I had to become a weapon. I spent days in Alexander's study with the stolen ledger. My nursing mind, trained to see patterns in symptoms, found them in the numbers. A cluster of payments to a biomedical waste disposal company that seemed astronomically high. I cross-referenced it with a property deed. Alexander looked at my notes, then at me, a new kind of respect dawning. "That's not a disposal company," he said slowly. "That's one of Mikkel's fronts for moving product. You just found his pipeline. We didn't shut it down, we used it." Alexander orchestrated a flawless leak of that information, not to the authorities but to a rival syndicate hungry for territory. Within 72 hours, Mikkel's pipeline was ablaze, both literally and figuratively. His cash flow seized. It was a devastating, deniable blow. The message was clear: touch what's mine and I will burn your empire to the ground. The police investigation into me stalled, then vanished. Pressure had been applied from unseen directions. Mikkel called that night. Alexander put it on speaker. His brother's voice was a cold snarl, conceding nothing but offering a tense, hateful truce. "You have changed, brother," Mikkel spat. "The woman has made you predictable." Alexander's hand found mine. "She has made me decisive," he replied, and ended the call. The immediate threat was over, but the cost was visible. The business was wounded. Our lives were forever marked. I had helped orchestrate an act of war. The woman who just wanted to be a nurse had plotted a strategic strike. In the aftermath, a final, bitter truth emerged. Through his contacts, Alexander obtained Greg's full confession, dictated to a lawyer days before his death. It wasn't just about money. Mikkel had approached him a year ago. He offered Greg a cut to get close to me, to report on my life, to make me fall for him. I was the target from the very first coffee date. The engagement, the wedding plans, all were Mikkel's design to create a lever against his brother, whom he knew watched from afar. Greg's last-minute panic wasn't about Lily. It was about realizing he was in over his head with monsters. He took the money and ran, but Mikkel never intended to let him go. The man I'd thought abandoned me had been a paid actor in a play I never knew was running. The humiliation was complete, and yet it freed me. My guilt over Greg vanished. He was never real. A year to the day after our wedding in the cathedral, Alexander asked me a question in the garden. Not as a proposition, but as a request. "Will you marry me again, Emma? Not because you have to, because you choose to, on our terms." We held a small ceremony in that same garden. Lily was our flower girl and our ring bearer. Nadia and Dmitri were our witnesses. I wore a simple white dress I chose myself. He cried during his vows. I did too. We promised to protect, to respect, to choose each other every day. The priest from the cathedral came, bewildered but smiling. This time the kiss felt like a beginning. The ledger was eventually sanitized, the most dangerous parts destroyed. Alexander began the slow, nearly impossible work of legitimizing his holdings, using my eye for detail to clean the books. It's a lifelong project. My nursing degree hangs in my office next to his. I run a charitable foundation for children's health care, funded by the Volkov family. It's a kind of atonement. Lily is 8, brilliant, safe, and knows her papa will move heaven and earth for her, but also that her mother can command a room with a glance. We don't pretend our story is normal. We pretend it's over, but we know vigilance is the price of our peace. The final surprise came on Lily's 9th birthday. A package arrived with no note. Inside was a small, exquisite music box. When opened, it played a lullaby. Taped underneath was a faded photograph of a young woman with my eyes holding a baby. On the back, in elegant script, "For my granddaughter with hope." Elena Volkov, Alexander's mother, who had died when he was a boy. He stared at it, his composure shattered. Mikhail had kept it all these years, and now he sent it. A gesture with no clear meaning. A threat, a peace offering. A reminder of the family we were all born into. We will never know. We placed it on Lily's shelf. A beautiful, complicated heirloom from a world of shadows. A reminder that the past is never fully settled, but that the future is what we build in spite of it. Our story began with a forced vow in front of strangers. It continues with a choice, remade every single day, in the quiet space we've carved out between two fires. So what is the price of safety? What is the value of a choice when every option is framed by someone else's design? My story isn't a romance. It's a case study in adaptation, in how a person can be broken down to their most basic instinct, protection of their child, and rebuilt into something else entirely. I didn't fall in love with a mafia boss. I learned to respect a strategist. I learned to trust a protector. And somewhere in the midst of survival, affection grew in the cracks, like a stubborn flower through concrete. The world loves a simple story, the villain and the victim, but life in the gray areas is more complex. Alexander was a criminal. He was also the man who read bedtime stories and cried at our wedding. I was a victim of coercion. I also became an accomplice in a shadow war. We are both. The human capacity for contradiction is vast. We contain multitudes and we contain monsters, and sometimes we marry them. This narrative, using marriage as collateral, as a tool of control, isn't unique to fiction. It's a documented pattern in organized crime and human trafficking in dynastic power plays. The lever is always the same. Find what someone loves more than their own freedom and you own them. For me, it was Lily. For Alexander, it was the idea of a family he could control, which ironically became the one thing he couldn't fully control: my will and eventually my heart. The ledger is gone. The business is cleaner, if never clean. Mikhail's truce holds for now. We live in the peace we've negotiated, a peace that is really just a well-managed conflict. Lily knows a version of the truth, age-appropriate, and she is happy. That is the non-negotiable victory. I am a nurse who never works a hospital shift, running a foundation that does genuine good with money from a dubious past. This is the compromise. This is the life we built from the wreckage. If you take anything from this, let it be this: freedom isn't just the absence of walls. Sometimes, it's the power to decide which walls you can live with and what you'll build inside them. My cage had a golden key, and one day I realized I didn't want to use it. Not because the door was locked, but because I had painted the walls myself. The most dangerous prison is the one you stop trying to leave. But that's my story. What's yours? What would you have done standing in that cathedral with a stranger's ultimatum and your child's future in the balance? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the psychology of power, the unseen rules of high-stakes worlds, and the stories of people who navigate impossible choices, make sure to subscribe. Your support lets us bring these complex, human narratives to light. Thanks for listening.